Hello travelers, Boardman21 here, and today we're going to discuss some of the funnest, best starting builds for the Acolyte class for 1.0. And with that in mind, we also have the new Mastery Warlock coming, so I will go over a build theory crafted for the best leveling for the Warlock class indeed, or at least one I think theoretically should do really well for you. Keep in mind that this all drops on the 21st. We don't get patch notes at least for a couple more days, probably Monday I'm assuming at this point, in which case some of these things may change, but it seems unlikely and I can't imagine them getting worse. I can only imagine them getting better. With that in mind, let's go ahead and discuss which 5 builds these are. Coming in at number 1, it's going to be for the Necromancer using Abomination. You can set this one up pretty early in the campaign to have the Abomination not decay his health. About mid-campaign, you'll really get him going, and by the end of the campaign, you're going to have the Abomination absolutely destroying the content for when you start into the early end game. By setting it up so that he doesn't decay health and has extra attack speed based on how many different types of minions that you're actually consuming to make him, you make him attack very fast, hit very hard, move very quickly, have a ton of leech, and of course since he has so much health, just great survivability overall. And because he's such a large minion and how taunt works in LE, this allows a lot of minions to stick to him instead of you, allowing you to just focus on moving around and controlling where he goes and who he's attacking. It's a very fun playstyle, and if you really want to have just a big beast of a minion, an abomination if you will, going around destroying the content for you, I definitely recommend checking this one out. Coming in at number 2, we have the Bone Golem Retaliation Necromancer. Again, a very strong build. As soon as you get access to the Bone Golem, which is really early, along with Marrow Shards, you can set this one up right off the bat. Probably one of the fastest, most powerful leveling ones, as it starts. By the time you get to level 15, you can already have it set up and going. With that in mind, this one does a ton of damage. It's incredibly tanky because the Bone Golem does in fact have a bit of taunt, allowing him to take enemies away from you, but you are using Marrow Shards, hitting him as fast as you can cast, and with his bone number it gives you a good AoE off of him to allow him to draw in the enemies, you to fire at him, and then allow his bone nova of projectiles going out every time that you hit him to just destroy enemies. And it scales incredibly easily with minion damage and minion physical damage as well as minion spell damage, so it saves a lot of stats in your prefixes, so you can work on health and defense for yourself, making you be able to be quite tanky while just annihilating enemies with your Bone Golem. Again, this is another minion build, but it is going to be a ton of fun, and I definitely recommend it, especially if you like to just have one minion and not a whole army. But that does bring us to the number 3 build. Coming in at number 3 is going to be if you like tons of minion. Again, rocking another Necromancer leveling guide. This one is where you just get as many skeletons and as many skeleton mages as possible, and you can get up to about 15 of them. You'll also be rocking to some zombies, or you can do raise. You can also have a Bone Golem if you want, but basically this one is all about getting as many minions as possible and having an entire army going to town on your behalf, absolutely annihilating all the competition by destroying everything for you. In the version that you're watching now, this is based in cold, but you can play this in basically any of the elements. You can do it as physical, you can do it as necrotic, you can do it as ice, and you can do it as fire. A lot of people do like the fire. Me personally, I like the ice, and that's the one I'm showcasing here, as it does a ton of damage, allowing you just to annihilate all of the enemies. You have your bow skeletons, which just have a ton of projectiles going off, and then of course your skeleton mages, which are also ranged, have all of their projectiles, and it allows you just to full screen clear incredibly fast while you just run around letting them do everything for you. Again, if you are into not the single minion but having as many minions as possible, this is the route I definitely recommend you go. Coming in at number 4, we have the Lich, and with the Lich we're going to be using Hungering Souls and Spirit Plague to just annihilate everything through the campaign and into the end game. And this one's a ton of fun because Spirit Plague has this ability to just bounce between enemies, especially after you've killed that enemy, which allows you just to like full screen clear mob dense areas with just a simple cast of Spirit Plague. On top of that, you can activate Death Seal so that you'll have a ton of extra increased damage, and that will proc Hungering Souls going off all of the time. You can get good hit damage as well, apply more poisons, as well as possess enemies with the Hungering Souls, which is just your second form of really good offense, as well as against single targets. That's when the Hungering Souls hit damage will really come in as you scale up and ramp up all those poison damage ticks. So you'll have a ton of hit damage up front, and then as you start scaling up that poison damage and poison stacks, you'll start to get more and more damage out of that. With this, it's very simple to put together. It's not based around using any uniques in the game, although there are some that you can wear later with LP that can make it even more powerful, but it is a very good speed farmer and just really good for mob dense maps because that Spirit Plague likes to jump around enemies and spread poison so quickly and easily. And it just feels really good to let it out, see all the enemies get possessed and poisoned, and then succumb to that with a death. Overall, very fun. You also get to play around in Reaper form, which is basically a free life, and you get that really cool outer skin that makes you look like the Reaper dual wielding the scythe no matter which weapons you're actually wearing, which overall is a very cool appearance and just feels really good to play with. Overall, just a super fun build. I've enjoyed playing this, and every time that I level up a Lich, this is the route that I always go with those Hungering Souls and Spirit Plague. With that in mind, let's go ahead and move on to our last build of the day. And coming in last but not least, this is going to be a Warlock leveling guide. Now again, we don't have any footage of this because the Warlock is not currently available in game, but at 1.0 it will be releasing. We do have access to the skill trees and the passives, which allows us to theory craft, and a lot of us have been looking into it, and we definitely think that the way that you're going to want to level your Warlock to have a really good fun time, as well as feel kind of OP, is going to be around bleed and Chthonic fissures. So here on max roll, we can break it down for you, and you can definitely get into the build planner if you want and put this together a bit more. Again, right at 1.0, we'll be doing our own leveling guides and probably showcase this after 1.0, but for now, again, off of theory crafting, based on what has been shown, we think that you should level the Warlock with a bleed build, using Chthonic Fissure to proc the Chaos Bolts through its node, which can also proc both Bone Curse and Rip Blood. So by just laying down the Fissures, you can also have it proc all of these other skills for you. And then in this setup, it's bound to hit monsters a lot, allowing you to apply tons of bleed and stacks without any uniques and exalted items, which means that this is a great starter build. Looking at the dot and bleed support available in the Warlock passive tree and skill trees, such as the Cauldron of Blood, which gives you that bleed overload and then Rip Blood onto 5 nearby enemies, as well as once it's active, you're casting a Rip Blood every second going off of that, which basically means Rip Bloods will just constantly be going, and you can get a lot of bleed chance out of Rip Blood, on top of this actually giving you bleed chance through the passive itself. And then you also have, again, the Crimson Favors, which is going to give you bleed chance with Rip Blood in particular, and then of course this one casting that Rip Blood every second while you have the overload active. Just tons of Rip Bloods going off, and you don't have to be the one to cast them at all. On top of that, you have the Spiteful Decay, which increases your damage over time per point that you put in, as well as more damage over time to cursed enemies, which is very easy to curse enemies as a Warlock, so you're going to get a ton increased and more damage over time to this, which means any of your dots that you're applying are going to do a ton more damage. And through the Vessel of Chaos, you have more increased damage over time, as well as more damage over time per overload that you have active. Now, while this is mostly going to be based around the bleed one, you could definitely throw in some ignites or get the other poison ones going as well for even more damage. But again, you have multiple sources of more damage for dot damage as well as increased, meaning that ailments are going to do a ton, and it seems so easy to just throw a ton of bleeds into the build. With all of that in mind, just keep in mind that you can run Spirit Plague as well with this. Spirit Plague has the Laceration node, which gives it a 150% chance to afflict bleed on enemies on hit. So between that and your passives, you have a ton of bleed after this. With the Putrid Recovery, you gain ward, you're going to have great survivability. And then within 𝐁𝐮𝐲 Nation, you have Physical Pen with bleed as well, up to 250%. And while this will put a bleed on you, again, that goes with your passives, especially at the top of the tree, where you can actually get more damage based on how many negative ailments are on you. Now, while that is at the top of the tree, more towards the end of campaign, early game, there's tons of ways to just scale that damage so you do a ton of dot damage. Again, through the passive tree, you have like Spirit Leech, which you can get access to very early, and this allows you to get a ton of health leech. So with the ward you're getting on the skills cast as well as all of that leech, you should have a ton of survivability. And then you have other nodes such as the ward per second, which will really help you, as well as less damage from all those enemies that you're cursing. Wither, which Withering should just be a curse of its own, doing a bunch of dot damage for you. Doom Herald, so you take even less damage while channeling if you decide to go ahead and throw on your channeling Ghost Flame, you'll be able to take a lot less damage, although I don't even think this one's really going to be needed with just how much damage you're doing in Leech that you're going to have, but you can definitely look into it. And then of course, as we get down here in the passive tree, you also have Soul Eater, which will give you a touch of mana regen, because Cthonic Fissure might have a little bit of mana cost to it. We'll have to really see once we get through it just how cheap it can be, but when you have Cthonic Fissure going off, doing your Chaos Bolts, which cost mana, Rip Bloods, which you can make technically free and possibly give back mana on the Rip Blood Orbs. Not sure if it'll work exactly like that, but overall you should just absolutely blaze through the campaign, leveling with Spirit Plague and with Cthonic Fissure, and basing it all around bleeds and dot damage. With the overloads, with Wither, with the curses, it should just be an absolute fun time of everything just being cursed, dotted, and destroyed. But with that, I'm going to go ahead and leave you guys with that. That's going to be the final build for the starters for the Acolytes. Let me know what you think in the comments below if any of these sound appetizing to you, and we'll discuss it. As always, stay safe, and I'll see you next time.